Now, this Dodge Charger is used in a police academy, which means it gets abused. Even though the manufacturer upgraded the brakes and drivetrain, today on Tech Garage, we're going to take it to the next level. Now, where is Brian?
Brian, report to Tech Garage. We got some performance upgrades to do.
Welcome to Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, these police package Dodge takes a lot of abuse, especially ours. It's used in a police academy. But you know, it doesn't make any difference whether you're driving a Dodge Charger or you're driving an everyday driver. We're going to show you all kinds of things that you can go out to your garage and perform. Real simple maintenance and inspection repair items, and we're going to replace some parts as well. We're going to start out in the rear. We're going to look at the differential and a differential service. This is a rear-wheel drive car, so that's an important factor. You may drive a pickup truck, doesn't make any difference. You're going to have a differential back there. You don't want to miss this. And we're going to look and talk about some drive axles. This one has some rear drive axles. You may have a front-wheel drive car. Front drive axles, same principle and same theory. We'll give you some inspection and diagnosis that you can use. Also, we're going to shift our gears and attentions to the brakes. We have DBA Rotors here, which is a really good upgraded package. The slotted rotors and some Hawk pads. Whether it's a Pursuit package once again or your car, great idea to upgrade the brakes. Last but not least, we'll talk about some bearings. We got some hub bearings and hubless bearings. You may drive a pickup truck with a hub bearing where you have to go in there and pack it. We'll show you how to do that. Also, hubless bearings. Now at Tech Garage, we're seeing a lot of failures with these hubless bearings, so you don't want to miss this. Brian's already started in the rear. Let's join him.
Well, let's face it, Hemis make a lot of power. Doesn't matter if it's a Challenger, a Charger, a Dodge Ram, or an old school Hemi. They make a ton of power. And once that power leaves the transmission, it's the rear differential's job to get that power down to the road. So proper service and maintenance back here is required. Now, the job itself couldn't be any easier, but here's a few tips that could be helpful. First of all, if you're working on jack stands, consider positioning them where you unload the suspension. That may give you additional access to refill. Now, that filler hole is always higher than the drain plug, so that could be your friend. You might be wondering, why do I have a magnet hanging here by the drain plug? Well, the ring and pinion gears in there break down in bearings over time, and you could get shavings or a tooth of a gear. Other things could happen in there that I like to see that evidence in a case like this where we can't pop the rear diff cover. So I'll use that magnet, I draw it over toward the drain plug, and I'll just leave it there. And I'm going to try to catch a little bit of that fluid, and we'll inspect it visually to see if there's any evidence of a future problem there. I hope there won't be. But the process really couldn't be much easier. I'm going to start the draining process now. John, I mentioned the ring and pinion gears in there. Show us how that really works.
Well, what's going on inside of the differential, and why do you want to change the fluid? Well, I have it all right here outside so we can take a look at it. All starts at the drive shaft. Now, the drive shaft's coming in to this is called a pinion. The pinion then contacts the ring gear. That's what Brian was mentioning, that contact between the pinion and the ring gear. Over time, you're going to get some metal shavings from that alone. Not only that, you also have some bearings. You got some carrier bearings, and you have a pinion bearing riding in there. That's going to take some wear over time, so you don't want the metal in there for that reason alone. One more thing you want to look at is you may have a ABS, anti-lock brake sensor right here. This is a magnetic sensor. Brian just said he uses a magnet to get the metal out. Well, think about this is a magnetic sensor. All that metal is going to track to the sensor, and it could vary the reading and give you an ABS code. So it's really a good idea to do that service. Now, one step further, our carrier actually attaches here to the drive axle. And I told you earlier, we're going to take a look at a drive axle. This transfers the power out to the wheels. This has a plunge joint on the inside so it can change effective lengths. And on this side, if you have a front wheel drive, it can turn to the left or right. This is a fixed joint here as it moves. Couple tips for you. You're going down the road, you got some clicking when you're turning to the left or to the right, you might need one of these. Or the boot itself's torn, you probably want to go ahead and replace that while you're under there. Good visual inspection's key. How's your fluid look, Brian?
Actually, John, to the naked eye, it looks pretty good. There's nothing obvious in there, but it does smell burnt. It looks really dark. This was a prime candidate for some service. Now, I can't stress this enough. You've got to use the right differential lube that your vehicle calls for. That's what the ring and pinion gears and bearings were engineered for, so use the right stuff. Additionally, if you're driving a Mopar with a limited slip differential, you've got to use the Mopar friction modifier. I can tell you from personal experience, if you don't, you're going to get some strange sounds and some clunking back in that rear end. So once I get started with my pump up into the filler hole and I get a little space in this bottle, I'll add the friction modifier right to the Mobil 1 to make sure I get the full dose, the full shot in there. Now, I'm excited about all the power we're going to get down to the road, but I'm really excited about what's coming next with the Hawk pads on the back and our DBA slotted rotors, John.
Yeah, well, while you take a short break, we're going to go ahead and finish up the rear end here. We'll get the differential done. We'll put some rear brakes on. When you come back, we're actually going to go to the front of the car. We're going to tackle the front brakes along with the hub bearings. We'll be right back with more Tech Garage.
This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Moog, official steering and suspension of NASCAR. Stage 8, the world's best locking fastener. Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back to the garage.
Well, welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, before we jump wholeheartedly into this awesome front brake upgrade on the Charger, we've got to stop and be considerate of the condition of the wheel bearing. Now, whether you're dealing with a hub assembly or a wheel bearing or a severe duty police car like this one or your daily driver, these bearings take a beating. And if we truly want to get maximum potential from the brakes, we've got to keep those wheels true in all conditions. So John's going to show you how you can inspect your wheel bearing in your driveway and how bearings really work while I get started.
What Brian's installing over there is a Moog wheel bearing, and that's really nice because you got the premium seals right here, precise bearing, crown bearings. I mean, this is going to make nice, smooth operation. A couple of bearing diagnostics for you. You can go down and get a stethoscope like this if it's making noise. Just put it in. When your car's up in the air, you want to put it on the bearing itself, spin the wheel. You may hear some growling noise in there, but keep in mind it may go away because you're taking the load off the car. But if you're driving down the road, here's another tip. You can go to the right or left, load and unload the bearing to determine what side it's on, or also you can drive and hear the noise, change road surfaces. If the noise changes, it's tires. If the noise stays the same, it's probably a bearing. And you want to address it before it gets to the point of this right here. This whole sealed wheel bearing here came apart. You can see the bearings embedded in there. Probably was a noise and the driver just kept driving and driving. By the time they brought it into Tech Garage here, come in on the hook. Now, you may also have a hub bearing, and I'll take you over here and I'll show you a hub bearing demonstration. Now, a hub bearing is everything's inside of that. So if I take this right here and we just pop this cap off, we can go inside this hub bearing, and you can see it's supported here with a cotter key, so we'll take and we'll pull that out. Once I get that out, we'll get a wrench here, and we'll pull the outside nut, and the bearings are actually in there, and they're serviceable. So we can go back to these and actually replace these or just pack them. We'll take a look at these and we'll see what we need to do. We'll get this out, and there's the front bearing right there. And a little trick for you. I'll put the nut back on here, and if you hold down and pull it, sometimes you can get lucky and knock the whole back assembly out with one shot. That's a nice way to do that. Now, if you come over here to the bench with me, I'll show you. I actually have some bearings right here. You just want to check them. You want to make sure that there's no brindling, no kind of different, just wear and tear inside that bearing. You want to make sure that everything's all right. Once you see that, you can repack them, or if it's not all right, you can go down to the auto parts store, get a premium set here, and just replace them. But we're going to go ahead and pack these. So I have a packer here. I'm sure you remember where you push the grease in your hand and sit there and pack away. We don't have to do that anymore. Inexpensive bearing packer, stick it down in there, push down on the top, work it around a little bit, and man, that's the way to go. Just like that, it starts oozing out all through the bearings, and we're nice and packed. Then what you want to do, you simply just want to reverse the procedure. Go ahead, put everything back in the hub, get you some cleaner, clean your hub. Now, you probably heard everybody filling up the hub and the bearing. You don't need to do that. Get a little grease, put it on your spindle, go in there, and then anytime you do the job, you always want to replace the seal as well. This is our seal back here to keep the dust in for any premature failure. So we can put this bearing back in here. We can knock a new seal on, reverse the procedure, torque specifications for the nut. You won't have any bearing problems. Brian, I think he's ready for reassembly.
Okay, because we're dealing with a rear-wheel drive Charger here, we don't have a front hub assembly or front wheel bearings to deal with or splines to deal with. Literally, this wheel bearing comes off with 3 bolts right into your hand. Now, you may need to give yours a little bit of encouragement. It depends on how much corrosion this has seen. But in any case, it only comes off one way. Your new wheel bearing goes on the same way. Check and make sure the machining of your tabs are in line the same way the old one was. And the surface there that we're marrying up to isn't too dirty. Again, if you've got corrosion and oxidation in there, go ahead and work that out. You want that surface nice and clean for a perfectly level mating surface. Again, performance of the wheel bearing. The most important tool in this part of the job is your torque wrench. You've got to torque these to spec. It keeps the wheel bearing true, ultimately keeping the wheel true. Don't skip this step. Hit them once, go back and get them again. Ours calls for 50 pounds. I'm going to get it buttoned up. We're going to get ready for the brake upgrade. So stay with us on Tech Garage. We'll be back.
Here's a Tech Garage pop quiz. What is a sign of a bad wheel bearing? A, noise, B, loose steering, C, tire wear, or D, all of the above? The correct answer is A. The most common sign of a bad wheel bearing is noise, but loose steering, tire wear, and vibration are all associated with wheel bearing failure.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Well, now it's time to talk rotors before we put them on our Charger, and we got some good ones here. We got the DBA Club Spec T3 rotors, and why am I so excited about these rotors? Well, when we talk about brakes, we need to talk about 2 things: coefficient of friction and heat transfer. Coefficient of friction, pretty easy. We want a high coefficient of friction between the pad and the rotor. We don't want it to sit there and slide. I can give you a good example. The coefficient of friction is going to affect the heat transfer. So if you just take your hands, put your coffee down, grab your hands, put it together, push really hard like that, and you'll actually start to feel the heat. The harder you push, the more heat's created. That's what brakes are doing. The pads are squeezing the rotor, and we're getting a lot of heat in there. One of the biggest enemies of a brake system is heat. So we got to dissipate the heat. And I'm really excited about these DBA rotors because I want to show you something right here. They have what's called a kangaroo paw webbing inside of these rotors, and this is neat because if you look right here, it's got 60% more heat transfer than the regular slotted rotors here. Even though it's ventilated, heat transfers from a place that has heat to less heat. So what's happening is the air's hitting that, it's transferring to the outside air. You hit the brakes, you get this massive temperature, whew, it's gone to the outside air. Brakes are going to last a lot longer. You're not going to have a pulsation. You're not going to have lateral run-out problems. We'll look at that a little bit later. One other cool thing, you see these 3 markings right here. This is incredible. This is thermal heat paint. And what thermal heat paint does, it changes colors. So you yourself can go out in the driveway, rotate your tires, or just look through the wheel if you can, and you see these paint colors. And if you look at these paint colors, it actually correlates right here. And this is on their website. You can see here, it's green, and it'll transfer over to white if it's 856 degrees. You get up in the 1,000 range here, it goes from a red all the way over to a white, starts to go away, the paint goes away. So you can tell if your brake's been heated up pretty good. You might want to change the fluid, it may be time to change the brakes, but you know, it's time to put this rotor on the Charger.
John, we're in great shape. That's the final torque on the caliper mounting bracket, called for 100 pounds on both. We're all set. You can see we've got this beefy DBA rotor in place. And here's a little tip. When you're working with a big heavy rotor like this and or by yourself, reinstall a lug nut here and pull it up true to the face of that wheel bearing so you're not fighting that too. That helped me get the caliper mounting bracket in place much more efficiently and effectively. We've got one of the new pads on the back and it looks great. We're going to install the second new pad. Now, really important is get your lube properties right. Everywhere that pads make contact, I've got a lot of lube right here in the slide, a lot of lube right here, and I got new hardware. You also want to make sure these slide pins John talked about are lubed up. I've done that. We're in great shape. Now, my second favorite tool in the shop is the bungee cord. Of course, it keeps that caliper up out of the way so there's no tension on this brake line. And I've got the caliper pistons pre-compressed. Beefier rotor, new pads. This guy's going to go down on here. with not too much of a fight, but it will be a tight fit. I'll tell you what, I'm already excited about the test drive. So, John, I think we're looking really good over here, buddy.
Well, we're giving our Charger the full makeover to get that power to the ground. We started in the rear and we worked to the front. But you know, there's a lot of little details in these jobs that can really make it nice, and we want to take care of all of them. Whether you have a car that's sitting out in the garage, you may have one of these calipers or one of these rotors, or you can even make these measurements. That's the cool part about that. That'll really make that job primo. We'll start right here with this caliper. Now my front calipers here could be rear calipers, doesn't make any difference. But listen, this is a fixed caliper. And what that means is it's actually bolted to the spindle and the pistons move in and out. Well, most calipers are moving calipers. Well, how does that work? Well, the pad actually gets in contact with the inside of the rotor, and then the caliper has to move for the other pad to contact. That's why it's so important to lubricate the slides. Now, there's two types I want to look at. The first one here, this is an actual floating caliper. So if I pull up this pin right here and I pull this out, you can see it floats back and forth on this pin. Well, floating because it has to move. It's a moving caliper. So I take my lube here. You can get this Permatex Ultra Disc Brake Lube. You can put it on here, clean this up with the wire wheel, get all the debris off, and make sure that the caliper's moving, or you may have premature pad wear on one side, or the caliper could even hang up and start pulling to one side. So it has to move. Now this one here, this is a sliding caliper. What does that mean? Same as the moving one, except it's sliding right here. If I push it, you can see it sliding up and down on the slides. There it goes. These slides right here, they have to be lubricated once again with your Ultra Brake Lube, and then wherever the pads have to move has to be lubricated and clean really, really well. It's that fine detail that makes those brakes work properly. Make sure that they're moving, make sure that it's clean. Now, on my rotors, a couple of things we want to look at there. First and foremost, there's a discard thickness. There's something stamped on there, and if it's not stamped on there, you need to look it up, because if your rotors start to get too thin and it goes beyond that discard thickness, it's not going to transfer heat. Remember all them kangaroo paws and the ports that get rid of that heat? If I don't transfer the heat, number one, it's dangerous. Number two, I get brake fade, start boiling the brake fluid, and my pedal's going to go to the floor. So you want to look at that. Something else, you can see this one right here. Take a look at that. I mean, that one actually come into Tech Garage, there's absolutely nothing left on it. I don't even know how they were driving it. But this one here, you would just measure it. Another one is parallelism or thickness variation. I take a rotor and I go around in 8 different places, and I don't want it to go in or out like that. 5/10 thousandths is about the norm. That's less than a half a thousandths, all right? And there's also lateral run-out. Lateral run-out, it can do this number here. It could be warped. You can have lateral run-out and no thickness variation or parallelism. So you want to do both measurements. What does that cause? It causes the pads to pulse in and out when you push the brakes. It's going to transfer that energy all the way up back to the master cylinder, and you're going to feel that in the pedal. You probably have. A lot of cars today have some pedal pulsation and need their rotors addressed. You push the pedal and you feel it. Lateral run-out could be measured with a dial indicator. I have a dial indicator strapped up right here to the rotor. I zeroed it, and what I do is just spin it around. As I spin it around, you can see this one's going from 0, and it's going way up there, almost about 8 thousandths of an inch. 3 thousandths is about the norm. Once you get past that, you're going to start feeling some pedal pulsation up that pedal. So here's a bunch of little tricks that you can perform right in the driveway to make sure your brakes are going to be in tip-top shape. We'll be back with more Tech Garage in a minute.
This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Dustless Blasting. It's the future of surface preparation. Precision Turbo, world's foremost manufacturer of high-performance aftermarket turbochargers. Disc Brakes Australia, race-proven technology. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back to the garage.
Welcome back to Tech Garage. Well, we got our police cruiser ready for duty. We got our wheel on, and most importantly, we got it torqued. You don't want to put a wheel on and not torque it because you may warp the rotor. Also, make sure you pump the brake pedal before you take it on a test drive.
I'm excited about how this thing is going to perform between an upgraded brake system, new wheel bearings all the way around so it's tracking properly, and with that limited slip differential service we did in the rear end, we're getting all the power down to the road. And I got to tell you, it feels good that when I need his help, code 3, he's got no distractions about the car in getting to my help.
One stipulation, I get to drive during the test drive.
I'm running the lights and siren.
All we got left is the email question of the week.
John Zane from LA emailed us, and he's got a 2012 Camaro that he drives a lot in a lot of stop-and-go traffic, of course, out there in LA. Now, after driving it for a while, he loses some brake pedal. It feels like it fades. What do we tell him?
Yeah, well, brake fade's the right word, Brian. First and foremost, you need to know a little bit about fluid.
Zane, you've got to have the right brake fluid and the right amount of that brake fluid in your brake system for it to perform properly. Brake fluid is hygroscopic. That means it draws in moisture from the outside air over time. So you may need a full brake system flush and fill, but make sure you use the right stuff. Follow your service manual.
That's a good idea. When it takes in that moisture, lowers the boiling point, you get a little air in the system, boom, spongy pedal. Don't forget about that coefficient of friction, that heat transfer. Remember the hands rubbing, these hawk pads and DBA rotors, high coefficient of friction, dissipates the heat, good way to go there. Now you also may have a master cylinder that's failing. You're sitting at a stoplight, it's dropping there. I don't know what your driving conditions are, but it may be a master cylinder problem, Zane, and I have a cutaway right here to show you what goes on inside of a master cylinder. Now you got a primary piston and a secondary piston, and you have a primary seal on the primary piston, and you have a primary seal on the secondary piston, and that fills these chambers right here. If they're bleeding by, your pedal is going to start sinking to the floor.
On our police cruiser, we're not going to have any of those issues between upgraded wheel bearings for truer contact patches, better tracking down the road, and ultimate stopping power. I can't wait to get in that thing.
Now you can't wait. I'm driving. Let's go.
Oh, we're going code 3. Brakes are awesome.
Yep, this one's ready to roll.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola College is a member institution of the Florida College System, with a current enrollment of over 2,000 students. Chipola offers bachelor's and associate degree programs, as well as college credit and workforce development certificates. Chipola was recently ranked as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.